Welcome back, CSE 121 W1 Fall 2020 for Programming 1, and this is part 2 of our 8 letter grades. Instead of a for loop, we're going to use a while loop. So we could use the same file. So if you worked on this file for the for loop, all that you have to do is do a save as. First of all, make sure you saved it, and then we're going to do a save as and just change the name from the for part to be while. That's all you have to do. Just make sure it still has the .py at the end and hit save. And it should be in your same CSE 121 directory. And keep in mind that if you had your other file open, you will have a console open for that. But we're going to work on this one, and we're going to use a while loop. And remember, while is set up meaning while this condition exists. All we're going to do is just replace this for part. We're just going to put in while. And our condition we could put in there. If you did something like this, now I mentioned this before in the other videos, if you put while true, this means that this would just go on forever and there would be no way to stop it. And what we're going to do is try to set up a way to stop it. And let's get it to run first. Let's just get it to run and see what happens. So we're going to say while true, we're going to do this. So let's save. And if you run it right now, we'll just put in 40, 30, 40, 30, 40, 30, and it's up to number 6 now. Basically, there's no way to get it to stop. That's the problem with doing this. So it's going to keep going. And unless we try to type in quit, something like that, I don't know if that'll do anything. It gave us an error, so at least stopped us, but we had no way to get out of this. So we just have to give ourselves some way to end the condition. So we're not going to do while true, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, but one way we could do this is we could make a variable, and we might want to have some way to get out of this. So we're going to put something here, and we'll do it with the first one. So we'll put a variable here, and we'll just call it entering, and we'll say entering equals true. That means entering is a variable that represents the state of being true. So instead of just saying while true, which is kind of what we did here, we're just going to say while entering equals true. So while that variable is equal to true, we have to find some way to make it false. So what's going to make that false? Well, if you're entering grades and you want to stop entering grades, you could almost put in some keyword, kind of like some panic word or something like that to end it. And maybe you want to put in something like end. So instead of when it comes up to like test 7 and there's going to be no test 7, you might want to actually just type in end. So we could try and do that. What we could do here is we could do it for the possible points. We could just go in here and put a condition and say if pp equals end, we'll just put a string of like end. So you could just type in end. So you don't have to put in a special number or anything like that. If it equals end, and we'll add our colon, and what we're going to do is we're going to do something called break. This will be a break, and it'll break out of a loop. And that means it'll just stop everything. It won't do anything else, and it'll jump to, then once the loop's over, it'll just continue with the rest of the code. If it doesn't do that, it should just continue along. It should ignore it and keep going. So unless it hits end, it'll keep going. So let's just try this and see what happens. All right, so I'll start off. I'll put in 50. I'll hit enter. And then I'll put 40. And I'll put 50. I'll hit enter, and I'll do 40. So right now we have an 80%. Now let's say I want to stop here. I could go here and type in end. And it should say, if this equals end, break it and continue on. So let's see what happens. And I get an error. And the reason I get an error is because we're already converting this to int, and this is not an int. And remember, if you try to put a string and it's trying to convert to an int, you're going to get an error. So we have to not do that yet. So the easy way to fix this is just don't convert this to an int. You might say, well, then how are we going to do math? Well, we're only going to convert it to an int after this thing gets validated. So if this gets validated, it'll break it. But if not, then we're going to convert it to an int. And we could do that with an else. We could just say else, and we could say pp equals int pp. So we're kind of delaying the conversion to being an integer. Because before, if you type in end and it's looking for an integer, you're going to get an error. But here, you can put in anything. You could put in numbers, you could put in end, you could put in end. If you put in end, it's going to break it, and anything else, which should just be numbers, it'll convert the number to this. Now, if you put in another word other than end, then you're going to run into problems. So obviously, there's other validation issues we're going to have to deal with. But right now, this will solve our problems, because if it's not end and it's a number, it's going to convert it to an integer, and then it should just continue on. So let's see how this works. Run it again, and I'll keep doing the 50, 40. I'll put in 50, 40, and I'll put in 50, 40, and that should give me an 80% so far, and maybe I'm done. I only have 2 here, so I'll just type in end, and it says you received 80% on 2 tests. So that was a way to break out of the loop. So we put a conditional statement inside our while loop. So our while loop is running the whole time and it's staying true. The only thing we're doing is we're putting in something to break it. We're not even saying entering is not true anymore. We're just breaking it right here. So we could have just said while true and I guess put a break there. Maybe we didn't even have to do entering. I was thinking we'd have to use a variable somewhere with entering to do that, but we could have just said while true and then just broke it. So that works okay. Now the only issue we're going to have here is if we go through and run it again and you just put in like gibberish, you're going to get an error. It's not end and it's not a number. So it's not doing that, so it's moving here, and then we're trying to convert it to an integer, and that's not working, so it's throwing an error. So we'll have to deal with that later. So I'm not worried about that right now, but so far if you keep putting in numbers, you're good, and if you basically put in end, you break it. So you'd have to know that end is a way to end that loop. So that's how the while loop works there. So that's all you have to do for that. So that's pretty easy. So once you're done with that, you can just save it and then just put a comment in for exercise 8 and just say that it's completed, that the 2 parts are completed. Just go into your add comment for exercise 8 and just put that you have it completed. And you don't have to put your username. I know what your username is. And that's the end of exercise 8. So we'll be doing more with this and combining more of this as we continue.